This is the We Are Her podcast for survivors of abuse or assault to share their stories. I'm your host, Emily Kemp, and I'll be having a conversation with a different survivor each week. I want to be sure to include a strong trigger warning with this podcast. The content we discuss includes topics related to violence. Listener discretion is advised. Welcome to the We Are Her podcast. Thank you so much for joining us today. And I know you want to remain anonymous, so I won't use your name, but I will give you just a quick opportunity to introduce yourself.
Yeah, I am a survivor, obviously, from the Midwest. We're currently in the middle of a blizzard, which is exciting.
Oh boy.
I do advocacy and prevention work at a college right now, which I kind of talk about a little bit in my story, but really my story is what got me into that field. So it's really exciting to be able to share my story. I think there's a stigma around survivors doing the work.
Yes.
So, okay, I'm glad I'm not the only one that thinks that. And so it's for me, like, this is a great outlet to be able to share my story while also like not having to share it as part of my work necessarily, but
right, to keep it a little bit more separate.
Yeah, but still being able to talk about it, because obviously the people I'm working with, it's about them.
Yeah, and I think that's very fitting actually with the We Are Her mission in general. We're kind of an organization of survivors, by survivors, for survivors. Yeah, and so I think that there is definitely places for what I call a survivor expert. And I think there's a lot of value in that. So I appreciate you saying that.
Yeah, thank you.
Yeah. So I guess I'll just kind of have you start sharing wherever it is that you feel the most comfortable.
Yeah. I tried to make a timeline because I feel like mine is a little scattered and back and forth. I was raped when I was 21 by my boyfriend at the time. We'd been together for 4 or 5 years, and kind of the typical, like, told me he loved me, we were going to get married, we had our future planned. And it happened one night over the summer before my senior year of college, and I'd stayed over, I'd gone to bed early. I was supposed to work like a super early shift the next day, and I woke up to him having sex with me. And I remember, like, it happened and I fell back asleep, and then I woke up in the morning and kind of got ready and like left for work, and I was like, that was weird. Like that something just like didn't sit right with me. And I just like couldn't place it. And I think like I just blocked it from my mind, right? Like I was definitely in denial and definitely in the mindset that somebody that you're dating, somebody that you're in love with, they can't sexually assault you. Like that was something that I was like, this is what you're telling yourself, this is what you're going to believe. And
I think it's a really common narrative. You know, I don't think a lot of people talk about sexual assault within the context of an intimate relationship. So I don't think you're alone at all about kind of believing that narrative. I think it's a really common narrative. And so then when things like sexual assault do happen within the context of that intimate relationship, it's super confusing.
It is. It really is. Because you're like, how can this happen? And you question, like, did it actually happen? Am I remembering this the right way? And so I really just like happened in the summer. I put it out of my mind and moved on. And a couple months later, we broke up, kind of just realizing for me, like finally realizing we were on very different paths and wanted different things and whatnot. And then like a month or so after we broke up, I was at this conference, and the speaker there started talking about garages and how we like put things in our garage that we just don't want to deal with. You just like
Mm-hmm.
shove everything in the back corner or like up in like the attic space or whatever. And you just kind of out of sight, out of mind. And something about that analogy just like totally resonated with
Mm.
me. And like sitting in this huge like conference arena with thousands of other people, it was like, holy shit.
Mm-hmm.
Like
It
here it all
clicked.
came. And I was like, so your mind has a garage of its own. And that
Right.
summer was a box that's
Yep.
very far back there. And it just on its own moved to the front. And I sat with that for a while and was like, yeah, I think that really happened. Like, I think that happened. And I went back to school. I was having dinner with my best friend in our cafeteria because why not talk about important, intimate things in public school?
Right. Yeah.
And I started talking to her, and I was like, so, I was just at this conference, and they had this metaphor, and so I think something happened with my ex. And she was like, okay, like knowing that I was like struggling with this breakup and whatnot, she was kind of like, what do you mean? And I start like describing everything to her, and I was like, I think that's sexual assault. And at this point, we're both crying in the cafeteria over burgers and fries and like, typical space. And it was really like, she was the first person I'd ever disclosed to. And I had really like the most positive response that
So
you
good.
can have, which is like,
Yeah.
doesn't happen very often.
No, yeah.
Um, but like for me, I couldn't label it for a really long time.
Mm-hmm.
So it was like a baby step for me to be like, so do you think that was wrong? Like asking her, like, do you think that's like, was it sex? Was it consensual? Like, was it not? And I called local hotline advocates and I was like,
Mm.
so I want to tell you what happened and I want someone to tell me like concretely was this sexual assault? Like looking for somebody to confirm it because I couldn't. And it was like really small steps for me to be like, okay, yep, that was sexual assault. And that was like the first baby step. And then for me, it's like now I can say, no, like that was rape. Like
Right.
I can call it that.
And I think we are very we are shy of that word, and sexual assault is synonymous with rape, but also sexual assault. A lot of different types of sexual assault can happen on a spectrum, and rape is a very specific type of sexual assault, and we tend to conflate the two. But I think there's power in naming it for exactly what it is. But that's a very scary and intense label. It makes people uncomfortable. It's hard to put that label on yourself. I think you can, as the survivor, can feel very uncomfortable. And once you label something, it kind of forces you to have to deal with it. And so it's like, well, are you ready to deal with it?
Yes.
What is that process going to look like from that
Exactly.
moment on? It's a lot.
And it kind of took a little while for me to like accept that. And I was in a position on my campus where I was pretty involved. I was pretty connected. I knew my resources. I knew a lot more about Title IX than probably
Mm.
your average college student. I was connected and on a first name basis with our Title IX coordinator, just on the basis of like due to the nature of my job on campus.
Mm-hmm.
And I still like struggled to accept that like it happened. And to like I had people I could go to and I like started talking to more people on campus and my ex wasn't on campus so I didn't go through like a Title IX process or anything
Sure.
in like investigation wise because there wasn't much that they could do. I was like, you're struggling and you like know where to go and you know who to like have help you. And that was like kind of just got me thinking about getting into sexual violence prevention and advocacy. Um, I spent the last few months of my college experience in counseling with a great counselor and I, graduated, thought I was fine. I was like, you did therapy for 3-4 months.
We're past it now. It's over. Moving on. We're just going to put that back in the garage with a nice bow on it. It's all settled.
You tackled it. Great. A
Good.
plus. And then I went home for the summer and I spent my whole summer in the same town as my ex with mutual friends. and a few unavoidable encounters with him. And this was with mutual friends who I did not feel safe telling them at all what happened.
Right. So you kind of had to pretend that everything was fine and it didn't
pretend.
happen. And was that like pretty anxiety provoking, knowing that you could kind of run into him at any time?
It was awful.
Yeah.
Like, I was constantly looking over my shoulder. I was terrified of seeing his vehicle in town. He knew where I worked, and I was like, please don't let him show up at work. Like, I hadn't really talked to a lot of people at work to tell them what happened, but in my mind was making like my own safety plan of like, if he comes in, who is working today that you can safely tell so that you can run and hide somewhere until, and it wasn't just like him, it was like anybody that he knew. And like any family friends or siblings, like it was just, I just was panicking all the time. And
you can't escape it in that environment.
No. And I like stopped going out. I wouldn't go downtown with any of my friends. I like just like, I'm going to spend my summer at home in my house, driving to work and coming back. Like that was my summer. And that was slightly my realization of like, okay, maybe your 3 months of therapy wasn't you dealing with it enough. Like maybe there's some more work to be done.
It's still clearly causing you a lot of distress.
Yeah.
And justifiably and rightly so. But that's a really hard way to live, you know? That's hard on the body. It's hard on the mind.
It was. I was having like nightmares and trouble sleeping and just like all of these things that, like, now that I do the work, I'm like, trauma response, like, yes, absolutely valid. But for me, like, I was like, what is going on? Like, why is my body acting like this? And then on top of that, that summer, I also disclosed to my parents because they knew that I had these like inevitable encounters, and they were like, it was just an ex-boyfriend, like, you can get over it, you can deal with it. And I was like, so much more than just an ex. Like, they
didn't understand the depth and gravity to which this person had harmed you. And so then, you know, home, which should be kind of a safe, supportive place, wasn't, because they didn't know and they couldn't support you in that way.
And I was just like really sick of hearing like, it's okay, like, put on your big girl pants and deal with it. Like, and God, disclosing to my parents was rough. My dad wanted to bury him in the backyard. Which was, you know, problematic for a few reasons. But for me, I was like, why would you pick the backyard? I don't want him.
And also just adding another level of escalation, you know, it's like, you're freaking out, and then your dad's freaking out, and then everyone's freaking out. And it's like not helpful or calming.
No, like, that's not reassuring that now you want to.
Now you have to worry about your dad murdering someone and going to jail on top of everything else. Yeah.
Let's just add that to my stress bucket.
Right.
And my mom asked all the wrong questions. All the, why did you stay with him after? Why did you have sex with him? Why didn't you break up with him right away? Are you sure you didn't like say something that made him think he could have sex with you that night? And I remember, like, I was using my therapy tools. I was trying. I was like, no, Mom, like this. No, like, trying to explain it, and it just like wasn't clicking, and I just kind of like gave up trying to explain it, you know, like.
But what an invalidating experience, you know, where you're really trying to be heard and seen and felt by someone so important to you, and they just are telling you, I mean, it's almost like gaslighting, sort of. You're like, are you sure? And then you start doubting yourself all over again, and it's just that same cycle over and over.
So she's asking me all these questions, and I'm like, I don't have answers for you. Like, and I was trying to say, like, this isn't what I need from you right now. Like, trying to articulate my needs, and it just like wasn't clicking. That I was just like, okay, like, we're just going to shut down and not talk about it anymore. And so my mom's asking me all these questions, which we know I've already asked myself over and over, right? Like, dealing with guilt and shame, and these are things that I talked about in therapy. And on top of that, had already like started, the more I like reflected on our relationship, was acknowledging that there was a lot of manipulation and verbal and emotional abuse, and it wasn't just the sexual abuse. And so for me, like, I can look back now and I can say, well, every argument was always your fault. And he was never to blame. So, like, of course, in that moment when he raped you, like, you're not going to think, yes, this was his fault, right? Like, you know that anytime you try to confront something with him, it gets turned back onto you.
I mean, he trained you to believe everything was your fault anyway. So in that situation, trying to like confront him about it would have gotten you nowhere.
Yeah. And now I like know more about trauma and freeze responses and how that messes with our brain and our memory formation. And I'm like, it all makes sense to me, but like in that moment and trying to have that conversation with my parents just like added to the stress of it all, added to my like withdrawing from everybody.
Right.
And
I think you're bringing up a really important point here too about that it wasn't just about that one incident of sexual assault. And most perpetrators of that type of violence don't just, there's a pattern leading up to it, but sometimes that pattern is really subversive and it's hard to see. And so people generally don't just randomly commit sexual assault. There's generally like a history with power and control issues before that. But if you didn't know how to see them, if you couldn't see them, then of course that experience of sexual assault felt like it probably came out of nowhere.
It absolutely did. So I decided my solution was to move across the country. That's how I was going to deal with things.
Oh boy.
It was like, this is gonna fix it. So I moved across the country. I was going to grad school and I was like, you're going to be great. Like, this is going to be fine. You're in a big city. He won't be there. You've got nothing to worry about. You'll be safe.
My garage is tidy.
Yep.
Boxes are in a row. Look at our garage. Yeah. Pristine garage.
Yes. That's exactly what it was. Or what I thought it was going to be. And that did not happen at all. And it like felt like it hit me out of nowhere because I was so convinced that like, you're thousands of miles away, like he would never be here, like you should feel safe. And I was still like in a new place on the other side of the country, panicking and always looking over my shoulder. Any sight of a vehicle that looked like his was like spiraling on the sidewalk, like walking to class. Like you can't focus, like intense panic attacks. I started having nightmares. So on top of being a full-time grad student, I was up from like 1 to 5 every morning, not sleeping and having all of this like overwhelming anxiety. And then I was in therapy twice a week, which felt like a lot to me. And again, like lucked out with an amazing therapist. And
it's still work though. Therapy isn't just like all flowers and roses and rainbows. Like you walk in there and you're processing some shit. So it's not, you can leave therapy sometimes feeling so exhausted. It's important work. And some people really, for them, they need to do it, but it doesn't mean that it's easy.
No. And it's like, so I'm taking a full course load and you're also like meeting with a therapist or a group like twice a week to process things. And like, I'm a very emotional person. So I'm usually leaving or crying during each session and like leaving super like distraught and exhausted from my emotions. And it was just like, I just was convinced that things were going to be so fine. And grad school was like, not.
And trauma is something that you carry with you, regardless of where you are in proximity to that other abuser. It's something that, you carry like a backpack. It's with you all the time. And you can either do something with it and kind of work on that healing piece, or it's just going to keep pounding you and coming up again and again and again.
And again, one weekend, things just kind of like snapped and I, in the library, studying with a friend, told another friend in grad school, like, I tend to pick public places to like say, hey, let me tell you my serious shit that I'm dealing with. And again, had another friend with a great response and a great like acceptance and, you know, validating my emotions. And it was really nice to finally have someone to say, like, who knew, okay, Tuesdays are going to be really hard because she's got therapy. So like, I'll check in, or, you know,
To
someone
have an
who,
ally like inside your grad school program with you who knew what you were going through.
and like, she didn't have that experience, but she was able to be there and like just let me feel all the feels and eat all the ice cream I wanted to. And, you know, so that was just like such a blessing. And she was super supportive as I started to like really care about sexual violence prevention. And so I started taking more classes where I was like, on top of being in therapy twice a week and dealing with your own shit, let's start studying the shit too.
Which can be kind of empowering.
Yeah.
To if you can wrap your mind around it as like a conceptual issue and kind of educate and be more aware.
Yeah. So I was in classes, I was doing like extracurricular events on our campus. I did an internship that had to do with prevention work, and that really helped me like slowly piece together all of these ways that my rape could have been prevented, which was like sort of empowering, but also like super frustrating at the same time. To be able to say, okay, well, had your family been more open about relationships and sex? And had you not grown up in a conservative family where it was shamed to talk about anything, maybe you could have asked some questions and like things would have made more sense early on, that like this was manipulative behavior. This isn't like respectful intimacy. I think especially during the time that I was in college, the idea that sexual assault only happens with a stranger was still very, very prominent. And I think that that is still prominent, and we know that it happens, but today, I think are doing better and starting to acknowledge more that more likely than not, the survivor knows the perpetrator.
Right. We're moving beyond the narrative of like, you have to like put your keys in between your fingers and check the backseat of your car and don't wear a ponytail.
And those were like all things that like were what I was told.
And, and that's what's going to solve this problem of sexual assault.
Yeah.
Is if you just put pepper spray on your keychain.
Which is now like not allowed at college campuses, but
that seems like a safety concern. Yeah. I can get behind that. We don't need people accidentally pepper spraying each other in the eyes.
Exactly. I think there's no one we certainly weren't talking about the need for consent within relationships. That was not a thing. We weren't talking about abuse being anything other than physical abuse. So for me, I was like, well, he never hit me. So like, how could you be in an abusive relationship? But we know that there are so many other kinds of abuse. And so for me, like I start thinking about all these things and I'm like, it's kind of the what ifs, like the past tense of like, if this would have happened, if this would have been the case, then maybe this wouldn't have happened. Like maybe I would have recognized red flags and maybe we wouldn't have dated for so long. And I think part of that is like recognizing the need and the change in society, like the work that we need to do. I think also some of that was still like processing how to not blame yourself, right? And so for me, like I certainly had those really close to me who didn't believe anything that I said, and you know, sided with him, which was super like just very detrimental to relationships and to my own like well-being. But I was also very fortunate to have a really good close group of friends who were there and really supported me like more than I ever could have imagined. And so for me, that was something that like just really was very impactful on my experience and my healing journey, and really got me thinking about, again, the students who weren't connected on campus and those who didn't have someone that they could tell or didn't know who they could tell.
Didn't have a safe supportive friend who would
Yeah,
accept them and believe them and validate them.
exactly. And like that really frustrated me. And I would think about like who's doing this education and what's this education that we're doing, because I really don't think this abstinence only stuff is cutting it.
Right.
And like what are we teaching kids, and like are we answering their questions, like are we giving them people they can talk to, and that for me was like, I don't know if we are, like I don't know that we're helping our students. I don't know that we're giving them outlets to process. I don't
Right.
know that we're providing them safe spaces. And I kind of decided that I really wanted to get into violence prevention and advocacy, because for me, like I wanted to be at least one person in someone's corner,
Yeah.
right? Like,
And you can't change the past. You can't go back in time and
mm-hmm.
change the past, but there is an opportunity to change the future for
Right.
other people, real time for survivors who are experiencing that crisis phase, and hopefully to help decrease the number of people experiencing these types of violence in the first place. And it's
Mm-hmm.
such needed work.
Yeah. And I think like it's both rewarding and frustrating.
Mm-hmm.
You know, I meet with people who, and it's almost like I love what I do, but it's hard not to like think about your own experience.
Mm-hmm.
So a big piece for me that has come up like both on my own and also in my various therapy appointments, that I didn't report. I didn't get any what some might call justice in that way. Like I didn't
You
get
didn't
to,
look for legal help or legal
no.
justice, right?
And like by the time I kind of brought it up in therapy, my therapist at the time was very honest and was very, you could, like if that will make you feel better, if that's going to help you, you could, but was also very honest about the likelihood of them doing anything was pretty slim.
Yeah, it does. Just because you report, it doesn't guarantee justice. And
Yeah.
then it's a very taxing, emotionally, mentally, physically taxing experience for survivors. So you're processing and dealing with the trauma of the abuse that you've experienced, and then also having to process the trauma of going through the justice system. And it is traumatic. It is super traumatic. And I think a lot of survivors weigh, is it worth it? You got to weigh the risks, the pros and cons, and oftentimes it's stacked in the con column, and it's like, well, this isn't going to help me move on. It's not going to help me feel healthier or better, so they choose not to. And it's, people don't understand kind of the logic or thought process behind why someone would choose not to report often.
And I think that's so frustrating, because even in like my work environment, you know, you have people that are like, well, why isn't this person going to come forward? Why aren't they going to report? Like, why wouldn't they do that? And I'm like, they've got X, Y, and Z, and like, they don't need to explain to you why they aren't going to. And like, society isn't understanding those thought processes
Mm-hmm.
that survivors have to go through when deciding, like, is it worth it? Because our justice system isn't really set up to help us all that much
Mm-hmm.
in this instance.
Right. And if that goes to trial or any kind of hearing, whoever that person's defense is often attacks the moral character of the survivor, and to have your integrity just kind of raked across the coals, your dignity raked across the coals, like that is yeah, that it hurts, and it takes a long time to get over something like that. And then still, again, may or may not end up in your favor anyway. So is it,
Right.
yeah, do you want to put
Right.
yourself through that hell? And I have mad respect for people who do it. Don't get me wrong. I just think you're completely right that people don't understand why someone would not want to do it.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. That's kind of my story.
Yeah. So how are things for you now? Can you talk a little bit more about like what healing looks like to you kind of on a day-to-day basis, or cuz I know it's ongoing. It's not something that you just like
Yeah,
arrive at.
for sure. I'm a person who really hates like change and transition. And so moving to new places, starting new jobs, and like that means having to find a new therapist.
Mhm.
And I mean, I lucked out with two incredible therapists while I was in school. And so for me it's like very scary to like start trying to find another one.
Right.
And that's something that I've avoided doing, because I am like, are they going to be as great as my other ones? And that's just like another person that you have to explain like
Yep.
all this like complicated back and forth like trauma to. But it's also something that I've always enjoyed, and like enjoyed is maybe not the right word,
Yeah.
but
Found helpful at least. Yeah.
yes, yes, it's helpful, and it's one of those things that I know is good for me, and I know it is helpful for me, and so, and I especially think like long-term sustainability wise, like doing the work, like I know that that's something that I want to and need to pursue. Um, I box now as like my
Oh,
form of exercise, and
nice.
it's incredible.
What does boxing do for you, do you think? Like, what kind of catharsis do you experience with that?
I find it so
Yeah.
empowering. Um, I think it's so ironic because with that I got into this because with my second therapist when I was having nightmares, we talked a lot about dream mastery. Are you familiar with
Is that
that?
like lucid dreaming kind of, where you can sort of
Yeah.
control it a bit?
So I was having this like reoccurring, consistent nightmare of like that involved my ex and like chasing me and assaulting me again, and you know, our dreams and our nightmares never fully like chronologically make sense,
Sure.
but it was same theme, same concept every time, and it was reoccurring. And so this idea of, and I am not a licensed therapist, but how my therapist explained it to me is that this dream mastery is like you imagining and like either writing down or saying out loud what the ending of that like nightmare would be.
Mm-hmm.
So for me, I was like having this constant nightmare of my ex chasing me, trying to sexually assault me again. And I remember sitting in therapy and I was like, I would just love to like kick his ass into a life sentence. Like that was what I wanted. Like physically, like release my anger, like one swift round kick and he was like locked away for life.
One karate chop
Yes.
to the groin or something. Yeah, that's awesome.
And for me, like that totally worked. Like I was like just talking about it, like helped me get rid of those nightmares. So definitely something I encourage. Can't do with people I work with because I'm not a therapist, but
Right.
worked for me and I love it. And was so that was kind of it felt really empowering in that nightmare.
Right. The idea of being able to do
Yeah,
that kind of helped resolve, like you got to rewrite your own ending in that
yeah.
scenario.
So
And
I was
then you're
like,
kind of like living it out in your boxing class.
yes,
It kind of like
yes,
plays into that idea that you can protect yourself and
it really does.
yeah.
And it's not, and like my boxing class isn't designed to be like self-defense. And
Right.
I think I love that about it. Like it's just about like, I mean, it's a high intensity workout. So it's very much like get your heart rate elevated, you feel really great. But I also leave feeling super strong
Mm-hmm.
and super empowered and very badass. And I love it because I can punch something to like the beat of like whatever curse words I'm feeling that day
Nice.
about anything.
Be
And so
dropping a lot of F bombs.
yes, yeah,
Yeah.
I so that's been like such a healing form of exercise, but also I tell our gym like instructor that I'm like it's exercise, but for now it kind of doubles as therapy for me a little bit. Like
Yeah.
it's good. So that's been super healthy for me. I think I'm not a big journaler. That's not like a healing method for me that's worked. I still have some escape tendencies, and so I did not move back home. I don't particularly love to be at home, just knowing that like he's still around. Um, so that is like I still have those like avoidance tendencies when I'm home for the holidays and things like that. And I don't really have like an answer as to how those like go away. Like I again things to work on in therapy,
Right. And
but
maybe they don't. And maybe it's less about like things existing or not existing, but just the choices that you can have and how you choose to react to them or manage them. I think you're bringing up a really important point too. Like therapy is amazing, but it isn't the only option for healing. It's one piece of a puzzle, and I know that for some people, at any given time, therapy might not be exactly what they need in that moment.
Mm-hmm.
So yeah, something like boxing, like you can heal however you need to heal, and I think people need to trust themselves a little bit around deciding for them what feels cathartic, what feels healing, and nobody can tell you how to heal. So if boxing is what's doing it for you, or going on a nature walk, or journaling, or not journaling, or whatever that looks like you have the wisdom within you to know, um, you know, how to heal and to take steps in that direction.
Yeah. And I think, especially like in the work that I do, that's something that I think is both important for me, but also important that I like share with other survivors, is that like healing is not a one size fits all. It's not like one person's healing options aren't the same as somebody else's, and they're not going to work, or they're not going to be your
Right.
go-to method. And I think um, those of us doing the work need to be committed to like sharing that with other
Yes.
survivors, so that they don't feel like, oh, I gotta go to therapy. Like, I joke sometimes like that with my friends, but also we know that deep down I like it and it's helpful for me. So like that's an okay method. But like if someone really doesn't want to go to therapy, like
Right. There are other options.
what other options?
I also wanted to bring up too, before we started recording the episode, you mentioned that you had an art show around your story. If you want to talk a little more about that.
Yeah, so we did in our community had a local artist who volunteers to do artwork, taking survivor stories. And so for me, um, this was like the first time that I really shared my story in a public way. Um, Again, anonymous, didn't have to put my name attached to it, but was able to like write out my story, and which was like very difficult, but also very healing. And then we have an artist who takes and does artwork out of that, and does a lot of like neutrals with teal and purple colors, and really ties in those like themes that connect with Sexual Assault Awareness Month and Domestic Violence Awareness Month. And then those are on display in the community for a while.
Wow. Where did yours get displayed?
It was on our local campus in
Oh,
an art
nice. I
gallery.
love that.
Um, so it was just a super exciting, like for me, something to be able to like finally share. And not like easy to share your story with a stranger,
Mm-hmm.
but getting to meet the artist like after the exhibit was up, and like seeing the artwork, it was just like really powerful to see, interesting to see how somebody else interprets your
Interpret it. Yeah, but it's a manifestation of your
story.
story in a very emotional,
Yeah.
artistic, like in tangible way, which is
Mm-hmm.
pretty cool.
Mm-hmm. So that was, and that's something that goes along we've done it for, I think this community that I'm in has done it for a few years now. So really great outlet for survivors.
I'm like
And I
taking
am,
notes because I want to maybe steal that
yeah,
for something that we are can
yeah.
do and make that is so cool.
I love it. I am not an artsy person at all. So like for me, that was like, I can do the writing part, but somebody else can't. Like I can't do that aspect. But like they all turned out so beautiful, and it's just nice to see those testaments to people's stories.
I love that. So
Yeah.
we're kind of wrapping up on time here, but I usually like to ask anyone who's on the podcast to share any message that you would want a survivor to hear who might be listening.
I think for me, um, my like true hope is that all survivors have someone who believes them, whether that's an advocate on a hotline that they've never met, or a best friend, a family member, a stranger, somebody. I think for me, my hope is that survivors get believed. And I think part of that, like, we need to be sharing our stories. And I think outlets like this podcast are incredible because it allows us to share our stories in ways that really value our safety and allow us to remain anonymous or not. And I think that that's incredible. And I think just being more comfortable sharing our experiences when we're ready, and knowing that it's okay to share your story and it's okay not to. Like my family and I don't acknowledge anything about any of it. And it's one of those where I'm like, that's just going to have to be something you kind of like accept at this point. But how can I find other outlets that allow me to share my story and that allow me to feel empowered in my own story?
I love that. And I feel super honored to hear your story and to receive your story. And we're just so thankful that you agreed to be on the podcast. And with that, I think we'll kind of wrap up.
For having me.
Yeah, thank you. We hope you enjoyed the podcast. Be sure to subscribe and don't forget to check out our online community at weareher.net. If you or someone you know has experienced abuse or assault, you can always call the National Domestic Violence Hotline at 1-800-799-7233.